Erik Larson's books read like a 21st century hit list and have sold millions of copies. Devil in the White City, Isaac Storm, In the Garden of Beasts, and Dead Wake, to name just a few. His latest effort is called The Splendid and the Vile, a saga of Churchill, family, and defiance during the Blitz. It takes a new look at what may have been the defining year of the 20th century after Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of Britain. Churchill had two all-consuming, world-saving goals: hold off Adolf Hitler and seduce Franklin Roosevelt. He got plenty of help. The images are unforgettable. Beginning in the fall of 1940, London was subjected to a brutal campaign of bombing by Nazi forces. It was called the Blitz. As Western Europe fell, Britain held the line.
Is it possible they do not realize that we shall never cease to persevere against them?
And Winston Churchill led the charge to keep calm and carry on.
I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
80 years later, Erik Larson's retelling of these events may be the most riveting account yet.
The day he became prime minister was the best day of his life, no matter that the world was going to hell at the same time.
Larson says he got the idea to write about London by moving to New York. About 5 years ago, he'd left his longtime home on the West Coast to settle in Manhattan. There was something he couldn't stop thinking about.
When I got to the city, I got this really vivid sense of how different 9/11 had to be for the city of New York, for residents of the city of New York. You know, the smoke, the sirens, the ambulances, the whole thing, plus the sense of violation that your home city had been attacked. And I started thinking, well, then how could anyone have survived the bombing of London during World War II?
The first phase of the London bombing was 57 consecutive nights, followed by an even more intensifying series of raids for 6 months after that.
These bombings of London are, of course, a part of Hitler's invasion plan.
In London in that period, it was a certainty that someone somewhere in London would die. Whether you yourself would be killed that night depended solely on luck.
Little does he know the spirit of the British nation or the tough fiber of the Londoners.
And I started thinking, well, maybe I could write about that, and how would I get at that? I thought about doing a family in London, and I thought, well, why not the quintessential family, Churchill and his family and his advisors? How did they actually do it?
I speak to you for the first time as Prime Minister.
Larson begins with the day Churchill became Prime Minister. His choice to focus on the year that follows and not the full 90 years that Churchill lived leads to a blistering pace.
As a writer, I mean, this is like a narrative pod that is just about perfect. It starts May 10, 1940, it ends May 10, 1941. I had my window, and when you have your window, you look at things that maybe other scholars ignore because they're after something else.
And what do you think you found about him that others haven't?
I think putting it all together in this one period gives a richer sense of the broad Churchill, the frivolity, the courage, and also the fact that he did not do this alone. He had a very close circle of advisors. He relied heavily on those advisors.
Those advisors include Frederick Lindemann, a physicist and intellectual who almost no one could stand, but Churchill considered essential. And Max Aitken, Lord Beaverbrook, not just one of the all-time great names, but a newspaper publisher who Churchill put in charge of aircraft production.
And he had his family. He had his family to worry about, but his family also supported him. So I think, if anything, what I've managed to do is provide this much more vivid sense of how you actually go about dealing with all this stuff.
The family members Larson focuses on include Churchill's wife, Clementine, and Larson's favorite character in the book, Churchill's youngest daughter, Mary.
Mary Churchill, 17 years old, was this lovely, charming, smart diarist. And I was very lucky that her daughter, Emma Soames, gave me permission to read and use her diary.
The team that led Britain through its most precarious year understood from the top on down that transatlantic messaging was everything.
Let us go forward together with our united strength.
His audience is not so much the British people as it is the American people.
Yes, this is something that Churchill understood very early, literally from day one. The only way we're going to win this is if America joins the war. And he tells his son Randolph exactly that. He says, we're going to prevail by dragging America into the war.
Nothing is more certain than that every trace of Hitler's footsteps will be blasted from the surface of the earth.
We interviewed Larson at the headquarters of the International Churchill Society in Washington, D.C., at George Washington University, where Lee Pollock is the executive director. Does the world need more Churchill biographies, more Churchill writing?
People ask that question all the time, why another book about Winston Churchill? And it's the same question that people ask, do we need another book about George Washington or Napoleon or Abraham Lincoln? Great figures of history command our interest and attention, and they're aspects or vignettes of history that we can continue to examine and re-examine.
The Society is full of a wide range of artifacts.
This is a photograph of the Cabinet War Rooms, now called the Churchill War Rooms in London.
Including this famous picture of Churchill when he wasn't cooperating for the camera, until the photographer took his cigar away. Churchill glared. There's a high bar for you for anything about Churchill, and you think Erik clears.
I think Erik definitely clears that. You know, Erik's a wonderful storyteller, and this is a wonderful story. Everything that happened. There was no, in that 12-month period, there was never a dull day or a day when something interesting and important wasn't happening.
Wherever the damage was worst, Churchill appeared, symbol of British fortitude.
He was fully aware that everything that he did had a symbolic effect. When he, went and toured bombed out areas and said, we're going to win, we're going to do this thing, people took heart from that. And he was aware at every turn what simple gestures meant.
He knew there was a theater to it.
He knew there was a theater to it, absolutely.
And he knew how to play the part.
He knew how to play the part. He was born to play that part.
Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. For without victory there is no survival.
Wow.
Fascinating.
Yeah, the other part that's really fascinating about this book is that he talks about the frivolity. He mentioned that. And Churchill, he danced, he sang. There were horrific things happening, such serious things happening, but he maintained a sense of humor. And he goes into this in the book quite a bit.
You have to survive
how he was
that.
able to keep people laughing and smiling in the face of all this horror.
And what a way with words. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. What a motto for life.
There it is, mobilizing the English language and sending it into battle.
Yeah, and if you're going through hell, keep going. Everyone has his day, and some days last longer than others. What a guy.
You got a self-help class here now, right? It's good stuff.
I love that you keep discovering more and more.